All right. So, hello again. Welcome back, everybody. And welcome back, Bill. We're getting closer to a discussion of the complex issues associated with the textures. We'll go back to the church for a second. And you can see when we blow up the size of this church, all of these blocks are different sizes. Now, I think with masonry, it's fairly important that at least a single row, that they're all the same height. And they're probably all going to be the same distance in. So the height is the same. The thickness of the wall is the same. What might change is the length of the block. And it comes up. Here is another type of way of seeing it. It's a little bit more flat on. It comes up, what happened? I mean, why are all these blocks like this? And there's all sorts of stories. I think it's important to say that I'm not a stonemason. There's a chance that a stonemason would look at this and go, well, of course it has to be like that. Here's a giant long one. Here's a little short one. Here's a really granddaddy long one under this window. And it could be that he could explain it in 10 seconds. I love the image of perhaps they worked on these things for years and years and years, and they got together one day and said, well, I wonder if we all went down to the well, I was hoping to be able to move this around a little bit, but I can't. Okay, we all went down to the local pub and got completely drunk. Could we build a church? It was a contest, and maybe that's where this church came from. I just don't think they would do that. I have another story that I just enjoy because it's fun, it's romantic, and it may be that these workers were building the rich church, the church of money, the church that the church wanted somewhere where there was plenty of money available. And there were blocks that were discarded because they weren't needed, or they had something slightly wrong with them, or they were blocks that had been cut off of other blocks. And the workers said, well, what are you planning to do with all these leftover blocks? And the church, the rich church, the church of money said, we don't know. We're probably going to put them all on a boat and take it out in the ocean and dump it. And the workers said, well, up in the north where we are, for our folks, our laborers, we would like to build our own little church that we could be in, our forest church. And you care if we take these blocks and do that? And the rich money church said, sure. And it could be that's, I don't know. I like that story because it's cool. But it doesn't much matter. I think the issue that comes up with respect to this discussion is a tiling texture of repetitive shapes would never tile out over this block structure. All right. Another issue, unrelated to the fact that all the blocks are a different size, is that you can see the interplay of light and shadows on the church itself. This shadow being created under this block because the light is coming from this direction. And this flower casting a shadow on these blocks. And this has to do with the physicality problem that is associated with textures. And to show this a little more clearly, I'll go get a drawing I did. This is Whimsy Bling. I created this to put it on a pop socket. Amazon lets me submit images for pop sockets. And you can see right here at the top of the lip, is the place where the redness of the lip interfaces with the flesh color of the skin of the face. And this is called the vermilion border. I delivered babies for years and years. I did 7,500 deliveries. I have my own little town somewhere. And while I was in training, I worked in the emergency room to generate money to pay for the food and lodging of my wife and children. And there's all sorts of little rules that you remember when you work in the emergency room. And one of the rules in the emergency room is if a person comes in and they manage to get a laceration or cut of their face where the cut transects across the vermilion border, when you start doing your stitching, you put your stitches right here first, and you take this side of the laceration and line the vermilion border up with that side of the laceration, because it turns out that the human eye, the human consciousness is extremely noticing of tiny little defects of symmetry. And if you put this back together wrong, where one side jags up higher than the other side, whenever this person goes and talks to somebody, they're going to be looking at that defect of their vermilion border. I understand people with cleft lips or trauma or shrapnel injuries in war may have their mouth injured in a way where the vermilion border is not perfect. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But in the emergency room, people like to get back to where they were if possible. And the only thing I'm mentioning is the reminder was always get this straight, because human beings are extremely able to notice defects of how things are supposed to go together. And when you go back to the church, the interplay of light and shadows on these rocks or stones, I have some nervousness, particularly if you're doing light affected changes or presentations of your drawing, that if you don't actually have physical structures that actually stick out, then when light angles are changed, or if you add a light or take away a light or alter the angle of the church, these little variations of light, color, and shadow, and the line of where the shadow line is, doesn't happen with a texture. And people, when they're looking at your drawing, will say, well, it's a drawing, but for some reason, I don't like it. And the reason they don't like it is because their mind is telling them the lights and the shadows and the angles and the drooping over of the darkness and lightness is inappropriate. And it's inappropriate because you placed a texture against a flat surface and did not have actual structures that stick out. Remembering that we are trying to go beyond something that looks perfect to something that looks beautiful. And the hypothesis of this whole discussion is, for human beings, before they can begin to comprehend it as beautiful, particularly stuff they're familiar with, it has to look real first. And if the light and shadows do not play off of the structures that have a physicality to them, they are going to have a subconscious understanding that, well, hang on a second, this is fake. This is fake. And they're not going to like it.